We are targeting this for the number one use that consumers tell us they want a computer for, which is to get on the internet, simply and fast. Is iMac?
Oh my God, throwback. Yeah, so it's gonna be a baking stream in the morning, and then most likely I won't be live at night because I'm going over. I'm gonna bake stuff because I'm going over to Noah J and T's place. If you guys know who they are, they're having a get together, so that's why I'm gonna bake stuff.
Millions of Americans own a personal computer.
Just what is this main artery of the information superhighway?
What is internet anyway? So what about this internet thing? Do you know anything about that?
Allison, can you explain what internet is?
Internet.
What is internet?
The internet.
What the hell is that exactly?
2024, and it's just Hawk to a girl. What is internet? Decades later.
The internet, a digital stand-in for every
gross.
pleasure afforded to humankind. Friendship, romance, education, work, news, and entertainment.
Hell no, to the no, no, no.
The last decade alone has seen a quickening of internet domination. The last 6 have cemented it as our leading technology. We use it on our phones, our computers, our TVs, our games. Some users report withdrawal symptoms if they can't access it. Others report loneliness, depression, and hopelessness. For better or for worse, the internet has become a part of us, an omnipresent God, a cynical companion. And yet, despite its ubiquity, despite the abundance of information, people, and activities, it is said to be ripping our society apart. Let's look closer. If you're watching this, you already understand how YouTube works. You watch a video, hopefully for a long time, and then click back onto your homepage to find similar, if not eerily curated videos ready to be queued. This is what happened to me a few weeks ago. I fell into a 90s high school content loop. It was mesmerizing. The clothes, the hair, the carefreeness. And each comment section was nearly identical to the last. Beyond the constant mourning for past generations and the math equations used to see how old these former teenagers are today, most of the comments went something like this. Look how happy these kids were without social media. Look at what we could have been. Look at what the internet took away from our youth. I found it interesting, this preoccupation with the well-being
There's
of
a Mia Cole
90s
video about the signs of
kids,
being terminally
juxtaposed with the implied
That might be a good
degradation of Zoomers. I mean, it's believable. I was raised on the internet. You fall down just the wrong pipelines and you can never look at 2 beautiful women near a cup ever again. We should probably ban this place. But wait. As the scholars say, we have to be so fucking for real. The internet isn't some anomaly. Humans have always rejected shiny new things. Socrates, for instance, was hesitant to teach writing, believing that oral traditions were better for the health of society. Writing would induce mass memory loss.
Wait. I know of the two women, 2 girls in 1 cup.
As people
I think I still missed the joke though.
stopped depending on their wits and started depending on,
I know them personally. Great gals.
I don't know, rocks? What did they write with back in the day? Centuries later, in the 1800s,
2 women in 1 cup.
literacy became widespread among certain classes. and books fell in price, making reading a popular pastime. This spawned a higher demand for paper, which led to plummeting supplies of rag cloth, which is what they used back in Yale fuck all. Manufacturers used every substitute they could think of, from silk to asparagus to hornet's nests. Most of the cheap books, however, were made with wood pulp. The rough texture and affordability of these pages spawned derogatory terms like pulp fiction and penny dreadful. What's worse is that these cheap books were laden with even cheaper stories. They featured sensationalism, violence, and debauchery. It was like watching Tubi. As Rachel Adler states, by the end of the 19th century, there was a growing concern, especially among middle-class parents, that these cheap, plentiful books were seducing children into a life of crime.
Wait, so you're telling me that these concerns that people are living lonely existences, that there's a loneliness epidemic, and that there are things that have been introduced into society that are ruining the children. You're telling me this isn't new? You mean this has happened throughout the past? Okay, because makes it see, the way that a lot of people talk about the internet, about social media, it makes it seem as if this is the first time that there's ever been a loneliness epidemic that has been created by this technology.
And violence. The same fate befell cinema shows, which became popular in the 1900s. Critics considered them gateway drugs to prostitution and crime. Radio was initially received better than previous
That's why we don't
mediums,
read books in
but
this
came
house.
to be the scapegoat for just about every problem on planet Earth. Let legend tell it, it caused tornadoes, disease, death. Not only was it a new medium, but it was a fast and widespread medium. Information could travel at the speed of
Yeah, this is what happens when you read books. This is what books tell you to do. Be gay and do crime. Books are
sound
bad.
and
They're
reach
evil.
just about anyone, especially enemies. Between the fear of inciting bad behavior and misinformation, radio was treated like a contagion. And then television came and we found our new up. After all, it was the moving pictures coupled with sound that really numbed our minds. Television unplugged us from real life, leading to drooling inactivity. Jerry Mander, a late activist, even considered TV to be a threat to democracy, a Trojan horse that would lead to dictatorship. These criticisms didn't just exist in pretentious academic journals or heavy-handed fanatic ranting. You can find them reflected, ironically so, in some of the most iconic media. Black Mirror, The Truman Show, 1984, Poltergeist, Fahrenheit 451. Each of these media reflect a different technology, a different obsession of its characters that ultimately ends in collapse. History reflects our unstable targeting of new media. Severtston argues that what critics saw as vulgarity and depravity intensified with each new medium. New media were seen to undermine morality, culture, enlightenment, democracy, community, and health. But what about the internet?
Yeah, okay. So this has been something that has occurred throughout really throughout like the last 200 years as big technological advancements were introduced to society. So the people behind these technological advancements posited them as this is a way to cure your loneliness. Look, the telegraph, the telephone, the phonograph, radio, every time it was advertised as a way to fix the problem of loneliness, because loneliness has been something that's always existed. There are many who believe that inherently human existence is lonely. like, it's not something that is an individual problem. Like, existing in this world, existing in this life brings loneliness is just accompanies it. So this idea of that we're today in the midst of a loneliness epidemic, like past generations have never experienced loneliness, is not true. The difference, though, is that 100, 200 years ago, people felt lonely, but they were less worried about the feeling of loneliness. They had like expectations on, oh yeah, no, I'm lonely, but that's okay. That's how it goes. I don't need to have all these things going on in my life. I don't need to have all these friends. Loneliness is just, it's an inescapable part of being human. Like there was more of that understanding. But then new technologies started to emerge. Like I said, the telegraph, the telephone, the phonograph, the radio. And with these, with every new technology, there was copious advertising. There was an idea, the idea in society that, oh, you're lonely and this piece of technology will fix your loneliness. Like this is the answer. So past Americans, past generations had just grown up accepting that loneliness is a part of our existence. Like that's just how it goes. But then technologies are introduced and the later generations are now being raised that, oh, loneliness is not something that is normal or that like is a part of existence. And if you're a lonely person, this technology is going to relieve you of that loneliness. Like you have something now so that you don't have to ever be lonely.
Scholars and even former Vice President Al Gore considered the internet a beacon. It was the savior that would pull our bodies from the trenches of television. Subvertson refers to this phase as cyber optimism. Guess how long
people are lonely, then they use the latest thing to come around to point the finger to go, hey, that thing has to be causing it. Right. It's this is the thing that's going to fix your loneliness. And then when that doesn't happen, when there's still, there's a loneliness epidemic, then they point to that thing that previously they were like, this is going to fix your loneliness, and go, this is the cause of your loneliness.
That lasted. Yeah, so if the internet was zapped into everyone's home some miraculous day in 1995, by midnight the next morning, there were at least 40 articles written about the dangers of the net. Parents of the 90s feared that children would be victimized by predators in chat rooms. Well, yes. Academics further stoked fear, calling the internet perverse and addictive. Online porn was likened to putting heroin in school milk. Some brave soul even wrote what can only be described as a fan fiction of a family buying a computer, leading to divorce, depression, and the father getting arrested for CP. Talk about a computer system that gets straight down to business.
Toxic, thank you for the
same
raid.
Condemnations and appeals to morality have plagued the internet for decades. From the 90s to the 2000s, even as late as the 2010s. In 2012, Stephen March published an internet call-out, citing its vanity and isolating qualities.
What is it finna play? Wow!
The 2010s were weird, lawless times. And also, I hate the Atlantic. All my homies hate the Atlantic. If you know, you know. But March describes what he calls the internet paradox, wherein our online connection broadens our social circle while simultaneously making it more shallow. March argues that over the years, the average American has become more lonely. Not only does this lead to depression and health scares, but according to John Cacioppo, loneliness can even change our DNA. It penetrates the deepest recesses of the cell to alter the way genes are being expressed. Look.
There was also a change in how loneliness was perceived. Little history lesson here. So in the 40s, a new word started to become popular, and that word was loner, which, is a word that we know and is used all the time, but it was used in a very negative way. So it was this idea that if you sought solitude, if you were someone who was alone, that you were a loner, and then that was bad. And so it then was this increased pressure to not be a loner, to not ever be alone, to not ever experience feelings of loneliness. Yes, loneliness being stigmatized.
I don't know how true that is. I am just a them, but it sounds an awful lot like the sensationalist warnings of the past. 20th century physicians, for instance, warned that women would get nerve damage if they read too many romance books. What were they reading? Wattpad fan fiction? Because I'll tell you from experience. Voldemort fan fiction. Reading that can damage something deep within you. Another element of March's sensationalism, at least in my opinion, is his reference to Yvette Vickers. Yvette was an actress and model of the golden age, but by the 90s, her work had slowed down. In 2010, her family noticed that her relationship with them had waned. Calls stopped coming, emails stopped sending. And then, in April of 2011, her mummified body was discovered by a neighbor. Next to her was a still running computer. March explains that Yvette had been using the internet to correspond with
Blob
fans
the second, thank you for the prime.
rather than her inner circle. Though the cause of her death isn't mentioned or I think publicly known, her isolated nature and the fact that she was found in the computer room.
I always remember being 8 and my grandparents thinking I was asleep, talking about how I was a loner. I'm so sorry. But also, the previous generation, your grandparents' would not have looked at that in a bad way. They wouldn't have looked at what they perceived to be your solitude, your isolationist behavior as you being maladjusted to society. Like it was literally a change, a societal change in the way that people viewed people who are alone and viewed the issue of loneliness.
Made the internet the prime suspect. The term lonely was used 27 times in March's article. On Vickers' Wikipedia page, her death was referred to as lonely. This denouncement of the internet as some masked killer is relative to the moral panics of past media. For example, Sovertson wrote about a Miss Glover who passed away in the 18th century. When her house was searched, they found a popular yet controversial book underneath her bed. 1774's The Sorrow of Young Werther. The book was considered immoral because it openly discussed suicide. Upon learning of the book's relation to a dead woman, Gentleman's Magazine wrote in 1784, the evil tendency of that pernicious work led to her death. As entertaining as it is to poke fun at sensational internet criticism, there is a glaring truth within it all. These articles wouldn't exist without some evidence of their relevance, right? They wouldn't have persisted for decades. Other media that has faced similar criticism have since grown to be accepted. In fact, Sovertson argues that criticism is usually reserved for the early stages of new media. It's been over 30 years.
This is what happened when the television was introduced. This is what happened when the car was introduced. In the beginning, they were both just like the other examples, the other technological advancements that I mentioned, that they were to be blamed for increasing American loneliness. That they were fracturing the long-standing tradition of being a friendly neighbor, and that they were fracturing people being together and spending time with one another, because now everyone's just gathered around the television, or people aren't taking people aren't taking public transit because they're just driving their cars by themselves.
We still treat the internet like it's contagious. Perhaps there is something wrong with the internet, something wrong with social media and the way it has absorbed us. Popular theory is that it's our fault. Our extreme onlineness is attributed to our own vanity, our self-induced loneliness, our preference for the digital instead of the physical. How boomerish this argument has become. Never mind the fact that most third spaces have been eradicated in favor of empty parking lots and highways. Never mind the fact that you have to pay to go anywhere nowadays. Never mind the fact that children are treated like pests wherever they dare exist, leading them to find solace in the digital. Internet obsession is simply not the fault of the consumer. We can practice mindfulness, we can tape our phones inside a box, we can revert back to flip phones. But damn, Jackie, I can't control capitalism. The internet complex, as explained by Jonathan Crary, is a digital world by which we have all been absorbed. It has plagued us with loneliness, depression, anxiety, and cruelty. It has led to the proliferation of mass information, while leaving its users highly uninformed. It manipulates, it gathers communities, it cajoles, it solves our issues. It's a contradiction. And it's by design. The internet complex is inherently tied to capitalism. In fact, they are structurally interwoven, Crary states. The notion that the internet could function independently from capitalism is one of the stupefying delusions of this moment. Think of capitalism like a vehicle. The engine, which incites capitalism—
Isn't it crazy that it always comes back to capitalism?
Is capital. The doors are imperialism and stretch like arms into various countries to meddle and destabilize.
Classic.
The steering wheel is the empire, guiding the occupants down the road. The fuel is blood, the endless toil that powers the car. The internet has to be something minor on this vehicle, but still conducive to the effectiveness of the car, like the windshield. Okay, does that sound bad? Like, does that sound silly? Is that a silly comparison? Because when I was writing this, I was like, does this shit eat or no? But here's my logic, right? Without the windshield, the car will still drive, but it'll look a little funny. You'll get bugs in your teeth and rain in the interior. Likewise, a windshield serves no purpose if not attached to the vehicle. As Crary stated earlier, the internet and capitalism are intertwined. The absence of one affects the other. More than that though, cars need maintenance, right? Capitalism was sold as this shiny, convenient system. It's defended heavily while clearly showing signs of deterioration. All those individual elements of the vehicle, the engine, the steering wheel, the battery, all of them have gone unserviced, unmaintained. We're pushing the car beyond its limits, and the passengers within it, you and me and everyone on Earth, are pummeling towards a certain end. The brakes have gone out. The steering wheel is locked. Now we see empires for what they are. We see political leaders for what they don't do. Even the internet, this thing that we find minor in the grand discussion of late-stage capitalism, is breaking down and revealing horrible truths. Our information is hoarded and then sold without our knowledge. Social media is privately owned and therefore legally censored. And despite being plugged into this thing that we have told is convenient and life-changing, it feels like the only thing we're able to use this tool for is passively existing. The internet is fueled by artificially manufactured appetites, Crary argues. The speed in which we are able to fulfill every desire, every whim, every lonely need has led to deterioration. We are, as Crary states, a world operating without pause, without the possibility of renewal or recovery, choking on its own heat and waste. Alright, let's scrap the car metaphor and instead put my English degree to use for once. Guy Debord talks at length about what he calls the spectacle. The spectacle refers to everyday visuals and media associated with capitalist and consumerist culture. This can refer to ads, films, celebrities, as well as the internet and social media. Debord considers the spectacle the result and project of capitalism, meaning that our capitalistic culture
I'll link the video
produces
after.
spectacles
It's
that
internet
we
loneliness
consume
and loss of
and are
community.
consumed by. But how did the internet become a spectacle?
One way to increase your net worth is to use the internet for all it's worth.
Both Crary and SciShow argue that in its early stages, the internet was owned and operated by the government. As one of the Green brothers argues, I genuinely can't tell if this is John or Hank, the purpose of the internet was research, not gaining wealth. But through a long and constant changing of hands, the internet became accessible to the average person. In the 90s, Tim Berners-Lee and Robert Caillou introduced the World Wide Web. This led to easier communication and some fun, but it also led to a transformation. The internet was a fruitful land. And you know how the US empire feels about that. Jonathan Crary argues that the internet's shift from government-owned to publicly used was intentional. The shift occurred as an essential part of the massive reorganization of capital flows and the remaking of individuals into entrepreneurs of their own human capital. In other words, the internet became a way to incorporate capitalism and toil into every orifice of life. This shift was noted rather early.
I mean, you could say that about pretty much everything. GPS was originally for military advantage. Now it's in our cars. I don't think this video creator is saying that it's only unique to the internet. I think that they are looking at the internet as the latest example of technology that has been taken over by capitalism, that has the problems that come from the internet, the problems that it creates are because of its devolving into just having capitalistic intentions. And the way that it's used today, right? And I think looking at this constantly talked about issue of the loneliness epidemic and how it's caused by the internet, that's what a lot of people believe, what people maintain, that the internet has ruined young people, the internet has ruined community, the internet has made people lonely. So it's breaking all of that down. And that's why I've also given some context of how the idea that we are suffering from loneliness is not something that is new, and the idea that a new technology is introduced as a way to fix your lonely problem but then is then blamed for people feeling lonely is not new, and how loneliness in general is not new. It's just the way that we view loneliness and the way that we are aware of it and look at it as this massive failure.
Early by John Bellamy Foster and Robert M. McChesney in 2011. They argue that our early fantasies of the internet have been sort of outpaced by our obsession with capitalism. What seemed to be an increasingly open public sphere, removed from the world of commodity exchange, seems to be morphing into a private sphere of increasingly closed, proprietary, even monopolistic markets. So the internet became infected with capitalism and therefore began to show its symptoms. God, does anyone else feel suddenly unwell? Well, doctor, what is it? I'm diagnosing you with irony, M. Shanspeare. Irony? Yeah, you're making a video about capitalism and consumerism on the internet, and yet you have a sponsor. curious. An internet-based sponsor, nonetheless. Milanote is an organizational tool that can help you plan just about anything. From creative projects to schoolwork.
That was good.
Even to just personal mood boards. And look,
capitalism pressure to commodify everything to feed economic growth. Just imagine social media without the need to profit from it. It would be amazing. Right. Like, is it social media that has caused feelings of, that has caused negative feelings? Or is it how social media became so commodified that everything about social media serves the purpose of capitalism? Like, what is the real problem here?
Before moving on to research, here I have designated 2 subboards to organize my thoughts. One is text-based and the other
I think I think something that's just so important to think about, because I'm not saying that feeling lonely is not a bad feeling. That's not what I'm saying when I'm explaining like how things changed from society 300 years ago to society now in our views on loneliness. But like in the 70s, psychologists put forth these theories where they hypothesize that you can overcome loneliness as long as you have as many social connections as you desire. And so therefore, if you don't have as many social connections as you desire, then you're going to be lonely. So like, to fix the problem, if you think you need 10 connections to keep yourself from being lonely, and you don't have 10 connections, then you'll be lonely. But if you get to the 10 connections, then you won't be lonely. And it's also like, the loneliness is an industry. Let's make no mistake about that. Loneliness is an industry, and it has ramped up expectations on what we need to have in our lives, how much social interaction, how many connections we need to have for it not to be a failure and for us not to be suffering from loneliness. So like, if you continue to be lonely, that's a moral failure. That is or not a moral failure, but like, you're not lining up the amount of social connections you need with the amount of ones that you have.
Always use Milanote's column feature. It allows me to stack similar sources together, which makes forming an argument or finding and creating a theme much easier. Milanote also works well with visual elements like pictures and videos. When I find a clip I want to use for editing, I'm able to quickly link it to my designated.
The walled garden effect on the internet is a byproduct of Steve Jobs revolutionizing the tech sector by isolating and monopolizing your time on Apple products, on Google, on TikTok, on YouTube. Capitalism preys on your loneliness because together we burn down corporations.
So they're easily findable on this subboard. Despite me being a one-person show, groups can also utilize Milanote. It's easy to share your board with other creatives or colleagues, and you can invite them to leave comments, give feedback, and make changes to the board. All of this in real time.
I'm obsessed with their setup here. This like theater
with no time limit.
This theater window
in the description and start your next creative project. Thank you to Milanote for sponsoring this video.
So basically, like, I think what my intent with watching this video and having this conversation is that it's not just as simple as the internet has created a generation of lonely people. That like, loneliness is this thing that has become a new problem in society, that it's the worst that it's ever been. And that is because of our reliance on the internet. Like, I don't believe it's as simple as that. And like, just overall, modern technology has made it more hopeful to have constant sociability. So like, modern technology means that you can socialize all the time. But it's also heightened worries about loneliness. And so that's why it's like constantly on people's minds. It's like, well, how do you have this paradox of, we're more connected than ever because of the internet, but people are more lonely than ever. But is that really the truth?
So look, if you know me, you know that I have not read Karl Marx.
Or is that the whole
I
picture?
famously used an article by Teen Vogue to explain to you capitalistic theory. And I stand by that decision. Fuck, who do I look like? I can read complex and political theory and then go on tumblr.com and find a 12-year-old girl who thought of and broke down that same theory first in a much more accessible and enlightened way. Today, I am that 12-year-old girl. No, the first pillar of capitalism is rapidity, which the internet reflects. Fast videos, fast bites of information, fast schedules, and fast trends. Discourse generally blames TikTok for this acceleration with their short-form success in the market of social media, which tracks. It's because of TikTok that every fucking platform on planet Earth has a short-form comment section. Like, Ariana, what are you doing here? But TikTok's brain-numbing quickness isn't new. In fact, they really just implemented something we had already been experiencing in every other facet of life. Andrewism once stated that capitalism is our master and time is its whip. Constant speed, or the collapsing of time, plays a crucial role in capitalism. The faster you live, the faster you consume, the faster you work, the faster money is made. If we look back on my video on phone obsession,
Gotta go turbo
we can see
speed.
how social media apps design their algorithms to favor rapidity, which in turn produces obsessive consumption. And for those of us whose job is literally screen, we see how capitalism is reproduced online. Let me buffer my next argument by saying that I am extremely privileged to consider posting silly little videos a job. I worked in hospitality before this, and let me tell you, the annoyances of YouTube simply do not compare to scrubbing human feces off of the wall or getting called the help by your customers.
Content creation is the hardest job in the world, though. Let's not forget.
I love minimum wage. Anyways, when it comes to YouTube, there's an expectation to constantly churn out videos, long and short. If I were
Should we bring this back?
With YouTube's ambitions, the quality of my videos would be slashed in half, maybe even more. Not to mention that I would probably pass away. What I'm doing would no longer be art, but content. A soulless, giant black void of manufactured whimsy. The faster you are on this platform and across social media, the more you're rewarded, yet the more isolated you and your work become. This brings us to the second pillar, constant connection. Our phones, our emails, our laptops, our dating profiles, our social media, they exist with an unspoken expectation that people are entitled to reach you at all times. If someone calls, you answer. If they text, you read it. If they email, you respond. Taking days or weeks or even months as per history would be a social faux pas. Not to mention, this infection spreads beyond social life and into your job. There is no space on earth besides the grave where you can rest without expectation of productivity. Isn't technology so amazing? And not to mention super fucking hypocritical? Because while encouraging non-stop connection, the internet and capitalism simultaneously shrink communities. Pillar number 3 is where all of those think pieces about loneliness and conspiracies about when injected school milk come back in. The general consensus about the internet, and more specifically social media, is that these tools...
Sorry, before we get into this next point, my firm tried to get me to be available 24/7. I told them I wouldn't for less than a 50% raise or they could fire me. Yeah, that was a big problem with people doing work from home, is that at first it was like, oh, this is this really great thing. And it was like, oh, actually people working from home are working more, because the idea is that you're working from home, so you're available now 24/7. Whenever we need you, 24/7, and you're just working all the way through. Have you read Noam Chomsky's writings?
lead to loneliness. Despite all the research and heavy-handed analogies, I don't exactly believe this. The internet more so reminds you of your loneliness, or it deludes you into thinking you're lonely by comparing yourself to others. If I were to get really serious and start donning my aluminum foil cap, I would argue that the internet seeks to sell loneliness to you. The internet honors personless existence through numbers, through aliases, through fast-moving, shallow experience. How could someone not feel lonely here? In this place where hundreds of thousands, millions of people can be condensed into small numbers. Likes, views, subscribers. In July of 2023, Olivia Sun published a video essay about how the human face is often lost online. That is to say, internet users are less likely to see humans behind the content they consume. This is due in part to sophisticated algorithms. It's as though the internet is
You're a Noam Chomsky fan. Name 5 of his
constantly
albums.
being reproduced and made in our image. Curated content and seemingly special treatment makes us feel like the main characters. Enter stage left, cynicism and apathy. Internet users often disregard or attack anything they find uninteresting or unrelated to them. Olivia states,
"Online, each person becomes subject to our judgment. You are the sole spectator in your enclosed world."
because the internet shares symptoms of capitalism, it's no surprise to see that hyper-individualism is favored by the latter as well. Debord argues that capitalism and the spectacle share a perceived goal of unification, but this goal is often a false promise. Both capitalism and the spectacle achieve nothing but separation. That explains the lack of intimacy online and the so-called loneliness epidemic. Instead of person to person, we often connect object to object. For instance, you and I have something special in our delusions, but you have more of a relationship with whatever screen you're watching this from, and I have more of a relationship with my camera, because you're not in the room with me right now. There's actually a fancy term for this: commodity fetishism. This Marxist theory argues that we often have a deeper relationship with objects rather than people, especially when it comes to
I don't know if this is what she's getting at, but look, you guys know me. I'm the number one shit talker on the internet, okay? Of the internet. But it isn't all bad. And I do recognize that there are plenty of people who have found community online. I mean, just the irony of us whenever we talk about things like this, and I'm streaming, like I'm on the internet. This is a community, like a community that we have formed via the internet. And I recognize that there's a lot of people who can't have community in real life due to, maybe they're disabled or they have health issues, whatever it is, where their opportunity to have community is via the internet. Like, it has provided a place for them to exist, like to be. And I think I think that's always an important thing to keep in mind when we are talking about the bad that is now so much of the internet, and how commodification, how capitalism has ruined so much of the internet. Like, those things are true, sure, but there's also good things that have not yet been stolen away, that are still like a life raft for people to have. Thank you for bringing that up. It's validating and appreciate a lot. Yeah, and I think it's something where, what I always say is, look, whenever people come in here and they're like, "Sorry, Queen, haven't watched your streams in a while. I was traveling or I was doing this thing." I'm like, that's great. I'm so happy for you. I am not somebody, even though, yes, I rely on my career is reliant upon people watching me every day and consuming everything I have. What I really want, though, is for y'all, if you have the, if you are able to have lives outside of the stream, of course. Like, I don't want your whole life to be the stream. But also knowing that for some people, they physically can't form those connections outside of the internet, which is why, like, me having this community here, this place for people to be is an important thing. Krista, thank you for the 14 months. Of course the stream isn't gonna be my whole life. I have other streams to watch too. Yeah, and then I think about people like Iron Mouse, who she's in this situation, the streamer who can't be around people. She can't be going outside. And so for her lifeline has been the internet. Like, streaming for Iron Mouse is something that a lot of other content creators won't ever understand, because they won't be in the position that she's been in.
Consumerism. For instance, we have a close connection with our phones and the money we use to buy our phone. We know nothing of the manufacturing process and nothing of the sourcing process, both of which likely use forced labor. We don't know who touched this before we did, their names, their ages, and they know nothing about us besides our lustful, violent consumerism. That reminds me, let's talk about hyper-individualism and internet activism. I know, not even Kendrick Lamar's hatred for Drake overshadows y'all's hatred for so-called selectivism. We have survived infographics, black squares, celebrities posing at protests for social media clout. However, beyond the fumbles, internet activism can be and is useful. Not only is it great for sharing quick updates or introductions to information, it also might be someone's only avenue to advocate for others. People who are disabled and immunocompromised, who may be unable to go to protests, people who use art and education as their form of activism but don't have a soapbox big enough outside of the digital. The internet can be a great place to advocate. And yet, because of the way it's designed, it often favors individualism and ignorance. Those same algorithms that cater to you and make you feel special now suppress your voice.
Right, and again, that is the result of capitalism.
They reward silence. What's more is that internet activism exists alongside the internet's aforementioned obsession with rapidity and simplicity and money. Digestible, quick information does better in the algo, meaning people are more likely to provide watered down information. Movements become fast-paced and unsustainable as people disregard critical engagement in favor of thoughtless and oftentimes self-driven action. For instance, the BDS movement, which stands for Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, is Palestinian-led and stretches back decades. It uses the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa as a sort of inspiration for its strategies. One of those strategies is purposeful and targeted boycotts. According to their Instagram, the list of companies they have curated to boycott and apply pressure to have been chosen carefully for maximum impact. It's been shown before, such as the case with South Africa, that this form of targeted boycotting is most sustainable and most effective. And yet, if you unwittingly go to their Instagram comment section, you can find hundreds of people who think that they, as non-Palestinian individuals who just started tuning into Palestine 8 months ago, know better than the historical collective. Out of spite or even just ignorance.
That's because they do.
People have disregarded.
I love the people who have just learned about something and then become the experts on it. Love those people.
BDS's list of companies in favor of their own. creating a chaotic and unorganized effort. When asked about why they have decided to individualize the movement, they argue, well, I don't use the products on the BDS list anyway. I won't be able to participate if we only focus on these targets.
Okay, let's do what you want to do.
Early versions of this script featured me yelling a lot, but that's not how we learn, right? We learn by patience. We learn by
silence, Palestinian. A TikToker's talking.
By facts. And the fact of the matter is, you have lost your goddamn mind, okay? So for the record, I think it's natural to have different opinions on how we reach a goal, so long that we understand that the goal is the same, the goal here being, liberation. When organizing, you will come across different opinions and methodology, and that's the beautiful complexity of working with other people, right? So my criticism isn't aimed at general disagreement. It's aimed at what I find to be displays of individualism. My criticism is that people seem to be centering themselves in a movement that is much more complex and much older than just one person can be. My criticism is the blatant disregard for organized effort in favor of individual effort. This comment, for instance, states that they don't care if their individual actions don't monetarily impact the occupation. Instead, they seem to care more about their own individual morals. At least that's my impression. And I get the sentiment, I get the frustration, I really do, and I will expand on that in a bit, but I just wanted to make clear what I was critiquing here. Someone in the comments made a great point that online users are conflating boycotts with abstinence. Abstaining from something is an individual choice. It's broad, personal, and morally driven. It usually has low impact on the financial health of the targeted company, but it serves yourself. You're abstaining from something that you don't agree with. Boycotting, on the other hand, is meant to be a mass demonstration of...
Yeah, and my thoughts are, if you personally want to do what you think is the thing to do, go for it. But if a movement that has been around for a long time, and there are people who've dedicated their lives to it, if they are not officially putting something out, you don't get to shame people then for not doing what your individual beliefs on the matter are. And a lot of people don't understand what a boycott is. Yeah.
Curated targets. This is what affects the target the most. It's very possible to both abstain and follow curated boycotts. The reason BDS explicitly rejects the 30-mile-long list of brands to boycott that is circulating on social media is because it is unorganized and unsustainable. Also, these lists that are circulating on social media tend to feature brands that are not monetarily tied to the occupation, and BDS explicitly targets brands that have something to lose financially. And that's why we don't see brands like Starbucks on this list, because to my knowledge, and I could be wrong, but from the brief research that I did.
And just to clarify, I think what got muddied was the calls for boycotting Starbucks came from Starbucks union busting. That's been around for a minute now, because Starbucks is notorious for union busting. So calls to boycott Starbucks are, from my understanding, related to those unionizing efforts. It's not something that BDS has officially has on their list. And there's been confusion around it. And it's why people have, I believe, good intentions, but are not going off of the official BDS list and are going off of what they think based on what they've seen online, and then are shaming and yelling at people. Valid AF, whilst right. I mean, yes, valid to boycott a company that is the number one union busting company notoriously.
they do not fund the occupation.
And also
the
shitty
previous
coffee.
CEO that everyone claims is funding the occupation has not been the CEO.
There's good reasons to boycott Starbucks, but muddying the BDS movement by tying it in against the organizers' wishes is irresponsible.
For over a year now.
No one is saying to shop there. It's probably best that you don't, because girly pop, they be union busting. Comments such as the ones under BDS's Instagram highlight the individualistic attitude present in online activism. This form of advocacy is unsustainable and it will burn out, which brings me to another example. The viral celebrity block list. Now, I caught this movement on its tail end.
It becomes a problem if you're using your personal position in a way that ends up making the movement as a whole less effective.
To find everything in shambles. As you can all imagine, most of us have been feeling extremely frustrated and extremely angered by what we're seeing across the world. Not just in places like Palestine or Congo or Tigray or Sudan, but everywhere. The price of living has gone up exponentially in the past few years. People are having to work longer and harder for less outcome. People are one missed paycheck away from homelessness, one overpriced grocery trip away from hunger. Also, our government, especially the United States, I get mad thinking about this, but especially the United States government, can line their pockets and fund the erasure of entire peoples across the world. This has been our energy for years.
Yeah, sorry if this is not totally a related statement, but I'm just thinking more of like the difference between has something actually drastically changed and is affecting us negatively in a way that it never has, or is it some combination of, yeah, things have gotten worse, but we are more aware of it. Like, I think about this with politics, where we just have this tendency to romanticize the past. Like, we're very nostalgic. We absolutely love to look back on even the early 2000s, like the nostalgia for the early 2000s, for the 90s. And this idea that problems were not persistent like they are today. And in some ways, like, things have worsened, but I also think a huge part of it is just how aware we are now. Everyone thinks, like the Reagan Republicans were, everyone thinks so, like Obama was the greatest politician. It was back when it was civil. I mean, I think a lot of people who were formerly obsessed with Obama and thought he was just like the greatest president and how presidents should be have changed their minds on that. But there still is, like, I saw this TikTok of people who were being nostalgic for the debate between Romney and Obama. And I get that it was coming from, oh my God, look at the Trump and Biden debate. This is the worst thing in the fucking world. Like, but they were nostalgic for that era in a way that didn't recognize that there were a lot of fucking problems then as well. And like the things that Romney was saying, the promises that Obama made, but like all of that is forgotten because of the nostalgia for better times. But like better times as you like think you remembered them. Yeah, people were being nostalgic for Bush. Yeah. And so it's like with Palestine. Okay, Palestine's a good example. What has happened to Palestinians is not something that is new. It has been going on for almost 8 decades. But what's changed is the awareness. And granted, what's been happening for the last 10 months is the worst that it's been on like a long-term, on like a consistent long-term scale, as far as the number of Palestinians who have died in X amount of time. But since the Nakba, right. But it's not something that is a new injustice. It's something that a lot of people now are aware of. The early 2000s politics were also bad instead of chuds being against woke. It was PC culture. Even Dems were making arguments against gay marriage at the time. Yeah, and you talk about like, oh, the election, you know, the 2020 election drama. Think about Gore versus Bush. Like, you know, this idea that democracy died in 2016. Did it? Really? Because I think I can think of other times in the past where you can argue that democracy died. Anywho.
Years. This year especially has been extremely tense. And it has only been made worse by the continued display of wealth and ignorance.
Yes, and last point. And the internet has made it easier to be aware of all these things.
On the part of celebrities and influencers. The 2024 Met Gala was the straw that broke the camel's back. While protesters took to the street outside the event, celebrities inside posed with extravagant outfits, ice purses, and diamonds galore. Meanwhile, an influencer by the name of Hailey Bailey showed off capital-esque fashion, and to do so, used the infamous yet often disputed quote by Marie Antoinette, "Let them eat cake." Given the state of the world, Hailey's TikTok was bad timing, right? People were already feeling a little French by the time she uploaded it. And to prove it, her blunder inspired the infamous digitine, wherein average internet users flocked across social media in droves, blocking celebrities and influencers alike, and leaving slashed follower counts in their wakes. The digitine has
thank you.
merit.
Oh, Nandre!
Shit.
Where's Nandre?
Good. Celebrities and influencers can be
Thank you for
a
the
little
17
weird.
months.
A majority tend to prioritize their money or...
Sorry, I just kind of talked over her. Watch, she's going to say she's going to say Nandre in a sing-song voice. Oh, you know me. Got him. Got him.
Digitine has merit. I think it is good. Celebrities and influencers can be a little weird. A majority tend to prioritize their money or image over caring about other people. A lot of them hoard wealth and use that wealth as a visor to ignore the depravity and hopelessness aimed at working class people. The way we idolize and simultaneously dehumanize celebrities is weird and should have ended
always be singing.
decades, if not centuries ago. However, the digitine was also massively unsustainable. The goal was different for everyone who participated. Some people blocked celebrities if they had been silent on what's happening around the world. Some people blocked celebrities if they have spoken up, but also attended the Met Gala. Some people blocked celebrities if they spoke up, didn't attend the Met Gala, but didn't post quote-unquote enough. What constituted as quote-unquote posting enough also varied across individuals. And then frenzy happened. Social media prizes quick and oftentimes unplanned action, and this affects how we advocate. The digitine was unorganized, with no cemented objective, and it often circulated false information. Hundreds of lists circulated, naming which celebs and influencers to block. It habitually targeted people who have and continue to speak up for Palestine and other sides. It was even common to start seeing Palestinian people on the list themselves, like Bella Hadid. You know, the Palestinian model who has utilized her platform for years
that's pretty
to
wild.
call for liberation.
Pretty wild.
Bella Hadid. Alan Rickman was apparently on a list, which might confuse you if you're a part of the apparent 1% who knows he's been dead for 8 years. When celebrities did start speaking up about Palestine, like Lizzo, netizens claimed that it was useless performativity. In fact, they started copy-pasting the same phrase under every post talking about Palestine.
Boycott the dead.
After the digitine started. The timing is crazy, implying that a person was only talking about Palestine to avoid being blocked. The weird part is,
why hasn't Alan Rickman said
was
something?
aimed at everyone, even those who have been amplifying the cause. This chaos brings into question the purpose of the blockout. Was it a collective effort to amplify Palestinians, or was it an expression of individual frustration?
As somebody who's worked in activism, I don't see any clear definition of who's being targeted. I don't see any strategy. Some people are saying we're targeting anybody who hasn't said anything about Gaza. Okay, that's a clear ask, right? Then I'm seeing some people saying, well, even if they did talk about Gaza, that's not enough. You need to be prepared to define what is enough if you're going to be asking things of people. And when your pressure campaign works and the influencer or celebrity, they say something about Gaza, right? You can't then move the goalpost and say, oh, sorry, we're still mad. You didn't do enough. It's too little too late. That's not a strategic protest anymore. That's just you being mad.
Which I want to emphasize, of course, is valid. I don't want this section to be misunderstood. I'm not saying that these movements are unhelpful or in vain. I'm not condemning anyone or advocating for perfect activism. No one on earth is a perfect
Perfection
activist.
is the enemy of good.
And I'm also not telling you that your feelings aren't valid. The frustration has been unquenchable, not just for Palestine, but for every nation, every person who is subjugated by systems of oppression. It's alienating, in a sense, to see the truth of the world, because you begin to feel like no one or nothing can bring a stop to the torture. But, however, we must realize that hopelessness is the goal of systemic oppression. It seeks to drive us even further toward individualistic action instead of collective action, because they know that they can't be beat by one person. My point is that we have to be more organized. Disorganization only works with addressing personal or individual
Unless that person is Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson.
symptoms.
He
right?
could do it.
Pain, anger, all of that may be alleviated by something as chaotic as the 2024 blockout. But long-term disorganization doesn't work in addressing systemic issues, which I hope we understand is the end goal. Imperialism, settler colonialism, capitalism, the war machine.
Wait, what? Damn, Israel gets so much flack. Hey, what happened to Shireen Abu Akleh? Wait, what? Israel murdered her.
Things can't be taken out by self-driven motives and carceral strategies. As the scholars say, be fucking for real. The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house.
I'm assuming they're being sarcastic. I was like, well, hold on a sec. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Look, it's that time of night. Okay. It's that time of night. Yes, I understand they're being sarcastic now. I genuinely was like, wait, did they not know? Did they think it was the other side?
But what are we to fucking do? The internet isn't all bad.
No jokes.
A few bad
no
apples
sarcasm.
doesn't invalidate the fruitful tree.
Nothing.
The internet provides information. Despite the fast-paced nature of social media, nuance and depth can be found in other places of the internet if you just look for it. The internet also provides entertainment, hobbies, ways of connecting that isn't entirely destabilized by its inherent proximity to capitalism. I've been able to use the internet to connect to you. However, object-mediated our relationship is. I've used the internet to see things that I would never have seen otherwise. Beautiful things, and simultaneously
like Blue Waffle
horrible things. Community is clearly exercised on the internet, or at least it's displayed through the internet for us to witness. People joining collectives, people sharing information, and mutual aid links. The internet has allowed me to see heart-wrenching displays of community. I've seen Palestinians tearing through rock and debris with their bare hands and feet to save people they don't know. I've been able to meet Ahmed. He's only a year older than I am, and I've been able to look at pictures of his beautiful family, including his nieces and nephews. And thanks to the internet, you can learn more about Ahmed and hundreds of other Palestinian families in need of aid. thanks to Operation Olive Branch. There's a link for Ahmed in my link tree, which you can find in the description, and you can also check out Operation Olive Branch, which is also linked in my description. The internet has left me in awe of aid workers in Congo who sacrifice their own safety to advocate for their community. Young people in Sudan chanting in unison for a revolution as they approach dire starvation numbers. People in Tigray, Puerto Rico, Hawaii, even where I live in the United States, indigenous people are losing land and losing life here as well, because settler colonialism is here as well, and Canada too. The internet is where I see most of this, where I see radical love and radical resistance. The internet is beautiful in these ways, but why can't we ask for better? These good aspects of the internet are used to justify the bad parts of the internet. Debord argues that the spectacle is so ubiquitous, so self-affirming in its own goodness and usefulness, that it can't be critiqued. The spectacle demands that we remain passive to it, that we give up autonomy. We must view the spectacle as unable to be diminished, torture to be lived without. As Debord states, the spectacle covers the entire surface of the world and bathes endlessly in its own glory. Prairie agrees, arguing that we treat the internet and other spectacles as if they were installed onto the computer of life, with no way of uninstalling it. You can even find this same sentiment in Fahrenheit 451, published in 1953. You can't argue with the four-walled televisor. Why? The televisor is real. It is immediate. It has dimension. It tells you what to think and blasts it in. It must be right. It seems so right. It rushes you on so quickly to its own conclusions, your mind hasn't time to protest. The internet is not our problem. Not our immediate problem. That is. It's a more acceptable target situated in an otherwise faultless machine. The internet hasn't stolen community from us. It hasn't ripped our society apart. It redefined these things, restructured them, sure, but it's not our final boss. The goal of the internet, of the spectacle itself, is constant recreation and longevity. It's the same goal, in fact, of every other system. White supremacy, colonialism, imperialism. These things seek to exhaust every avenue, every person, every tool at their disposal in order to continue their performance. Prairie argues that getting rid of capitalism will destroy the internet. And sure, I agree, it would destroy the internet and life as we know it, but it won't destroy us.
Another world is possible. Internet or not. Click off.
A tool is a tool no
log
matter how
on.
it's used.
Maybe we're soon to see it.
Interesting. When Mark Zuckerberg helped to create internet.org in 2013, he claimed to be doing so to provide internet access to the billions on Earth still lacking it. He explained, "We just believe that everyone deserves to be connected and on the internet." Oh, okay. How altruistic of him. Clearly, he had no ulterior motives for bringing the internet to people. Besides the fact that it was clearly financially beneficial for Mark Zuckerberg to emphasize this human need for connection. And Facebook Vice President Andrew Bosworth declared, "The ugly truth is that we believe in connecting people so deeply that anything that allows us to connect more people more often is de facto good. This idea that more connections are always desirable, which Silicon Valley self-consciously spreads, exacerbates anxieties about loneliness. It does so especially when loneliness is understood as a discrepancy between the number of connections one has and the number one desires. Of course, communication companies have long thrived on this discrepancy. But today's companies raise expectations further and have turned internet connectivity into an entitlement, a desire that tolerates no limits. For how much connection is enough, the implicit answer seems to be that one can never have enough. So, I guess in summary, what I would say is the internet has changed a lot of people's lives for better or for worse. A lot of people who have found community through the internet, but also this idea that like you have to have a certain number of connections, and if you don't, then that's where loneliness comes from, and loneliness is like this personal problem and is an awful thing that like you need to be spending every day solving, and that it's never been a thing that's ever been a thing. Like that, I think, is what I'm pushing back on. And keeping in mind that the internet, which is now just a tool for capitalism, thrives off of the idea that there is a loneliness problem and you need the internet to be able to solve that, or vice versa, that like, you know, the internet is the cause of your loneliness.